Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Mom Live. I am in a hurry today. I'm running really behind, so I've got to hurry and get through this, although this is a super interesting study. So this is my Moving Forward series. This particular, I just started a 52-day, basically, study on women of the Bible. And it's part of Principle 1, Building a Strong Foundation. And basically, I don't know, you could call it spirituality. For me, it's learning about women who came before us. I'm a Christian, I believe in the Bible, but even if you don't, let's just say it's a historical document. So we're learning about what women went through in biblical times, around those times. Different women, different scenarios, but I feel like we can relate to them, right? And it doesn't have to be just for women. I mean, most of us have had a mom or grandma or sister or whatever. So to me, this is very empowering. I'm able to relate to each of these women that we're talking about. We started with Eve. Yesterday was Sarah. I didn't have a lot on Sarah. But today is Hagar, and she was part of Sarah. And so we'll learn a little more about Sarah today as well as Hagar. So I'm going to get moving. I'm a doctor of higher education, entrepreneur, businesswoman, widow, mom, grandma, good friend, fellow humanitarian. I'm on here because I am moving forward in my life, and this seems to be where my destiny. So I'm doing my Moving Forward series 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and then I have a couple on the weekend that I do. House remodel, which is kicking my butt right now. I'm not gonna lie, it's kicking my butt. And bodybuilding on Friday. I do a bodybuilding update. I have an update this week. So with that, I'm getting right to it because, so I did find some good quotes. There's more quotes on Hagar too. Isn't that strange? Sarah didn't have a lot, but Hagar does. So Hagar's name, Hagar was an Egyptian. And it says in my book, 52 Bible Studies, Women of the Bible, Jean E. Siswerda. She says her name is Egyptian and may mean fugitive or immigrant, which makes sense, right? Okay, so for the quotes today, I've got a few of them. It says, now, one of the main things, and I think I've listed on here, is that Hagar felt like a victim. I don't know if she felt like a victim, but she felt like God didn't see her. And so one of the quotes was, "The God who sees me." The other one is, "The God who cradles the galaxies in his hands treasures your every tear. You are not alone." And that's Shadea Richie, it looks like. And the second one is, "God heard the voice of the boy." Now the voice was, let's see, I think it's Ishmael, am I correct? Oh boy. So Abraham and Hagar had a son because Sarah, I'm just reminding you, Sarah, God had promised her she would have a child, but she must have been in her 80s, because I did make a note that I found Ishmael. It is Ishmael. Okay, Hagar and Ishmael had a son, and Adam was 86 at that time when Ishmael was born. So Hagar must have been, I don't know if she was super young. She was a handmaiden. But I would assume Sarah is maybe a little younger than Abraham. And it was 90 when she finally had a child. But at this point, she had Hagar was her maidservant, and she didn't think that she was ever going to have a child, so she gave her maidservant to Abraham. And that's Hagar, and that's who we're studying today. So God heard the voice of the boy. The boy was Ishmael. The angel of God called to Hagar out of the sky and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. That's Genesis 21:17. So because Sarah became jealous of Hagar and the son after she had a baby, she had Abraham cast him out. They basically went out into the desert. And so, that had to have been scary, right? And so Hagar was sad and talking to God. And so that's that verse. That's Genesis 21:17. Okay, so I'm sorry, I am in such a hurry. I have an appointment at 11, so I've got to really zip through this, and there's so much to it that I found. It's super exciting. Okay, so Hagar, her character. So Hagar, a foreigner and slave, she let pride overtake her when she became Abraham's wife. And that's what I was wondering too. Sarah became jealous of her for a reason. And so it sounds like Hagar kind of got, because she had a baby and she knew that Sarah didn't, she kind of was maybe being haughty about it, and Sarah got pretty angry. And so maybe you don't want to do that when you're in that situation. So a lonely woman with few resources, she suffered harsh punishment for her mistake. She obeyed God's voice as soon as she heard it, and it was given a promise that her son would become the father of a great nation. And that's Genesis and Galatians. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. So, I don't know, God must have allowed that conception as well. But later on, allowed them to go away from that whole situation as well. Because remember that God wanted to keep the bloodline sacred with Sarah and Abraham, and he wanted the bloodline to go down to David and then to Christ. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham, Isaac, who grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham had a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had bore to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abram. So the son must have also been mocking. I don't know if it was Sarah and Isaac or who, but get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac. That's an impossible situation, guys. Very impossible. I mean, I'm sure she wanted to have some pride, but yeah. Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. She went on her way and wandered in the desert. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat there nearby. She began to sob. So at this point, she must have thought that both Abraham and God deserted her but I mean, who wouldn't, I mean, like we said, we talked about yesterday, these women of the Bible and men of the Bible, I think we thought that they were more superhuman than us, but they were the same as us. So think about it. You're wandering around the desert. First of all, I would be scared of snakes. I don't like them. And then they ran out of water. And so she was scared, right? So God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar?" Ooh, there's the angel again. Remember we were talking about angels last week. Ooh. Okay, so what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. That's Genesis 16. It's 16 and it goes through, let's see, it's 15 and then 14. It goes through several verses in there. So just read all of Genesis. Genesis 16. Okay, so Hagar's life and times. Slavery. Slavery was a common practice in ancient Eastern culture, so common that God's laws made provisions for its safe and fair practice, but not for its destruction. Slaves were obtained in any of a number of ways. Captives from war became slaves, particularly virgin women, and that's Numbers 31, 7 through 32. So particularly virgin women, men and women, and their children went into slavery to pay debts. That's in Leviticus 25:39. Slaves could be purchased, Leviticus 25:44, and sometimes slavery was even voluntary, as when a male slave who could have gone free remained in servitude to stay with his wife he loved. Exodus 21, 2 through 6. Couldn't have been easy, though. Hagar, an Egyptian, probably became a slave to Abraham and Sarah when they left Egypt. That's Genesis 12:20. Leaving her homeland behind, she made herself useful and proved herself trustworthy, thereby becoming Sarah's maidservant, a position of some importance in the household. So think about it. Sarah and Abraham were basically considered the leaders of that particular group of people, but remember, they're the mother and father of our nation, basically. So they had a pretty high, in my opinion, they must have had a pretty high status. So Hagar had to have worked pretty hard to earn her way into that place, right? Now, one would wonder if she thought about maybe becoming because they had more than one wife in that day. Maybe she thought about becoming part of the concubine, or who knows? That's my thoughts. Okay, but we do know that it was a position of some importance in the household. Sarah must have had some confidence and perhaps even affection for Hagar to want her to be the surrogate mother of her son. So she had to think pretty deeply about it, right? I would assume looks probably had something to do with it. Probably health, probably good work ethic, probably the fact she must have trusted her. Okay, so Sarah and some affection, I would assume. Such practices were common in that day. Infertile women urged their husbands to sleep with their maidservants to gain a child, an heir for the family. Female slaves were often made the concubines or wives of the master or one of his sons. Their children became the property and sometimes the heirs of their masters. As female slaves, they had no choice. So we talked about, I wondered yesterday if they had a choice or not. So she really didn't have a choice. That's not a good place to be, is it? They had no rights and no one to defend them. That's kind of sad. Our life and times. Many women today are in a position similar to Hagar's. They may not be actual slaves, but they are in positions of weakness with no one to defend them. No one except God. The same God who defended Hagar had heard the cries of their son in the desert, hears the cries of helpless women and their children today. When we are at our weakest, God is at his best, ready to step in and say to us, as he said to Hagar, do not be afraid. Genesis 21:17. I also sort of believe, like, I wrote down 5 things about Hagar that I can relate to as a human woman, human being. So I'm just reading a little bit of, you kind of have in this workbook, you have some stuff you can work through. So Sarah's proposition was a customary one of that day. Hagar had little to say, but she must have had some reaction to the proposition. What do you think the reaction might have been? I have another really cool article on this other that I thought would be a little more in depth about Hagar and sort of what she might have been thinking. But I'm going to skip down to, why do you think the pregnant Hagar began to despise Sarah? I think that's probably maybe pride, don't you? I mean, we all have it inside of us. She was having a baby. I would imagine that Abraham was probably excited about it because they wanted a child. Let's just face it, us women, man. I don't know what it is about women, but they're not very nice to each other. I mean, I see that, and I try to be, but I'm competitive as anyone, you know what I mean? I've had to work at being nice to other women and compliment them, and once they're friends, but I don't know what it is about us women that we're just not very nice to each other. And when you get in a situation like that where you have one husband and you haven't had children, and the other person did get pregnant, maybe they thought, well, I'm blessed and this person isn't, or, I'm special. Your pride takes over. It's kind of sad. Okay, so that's kind of all I'm going to do on the Bible study part of it. I have to watch the time. Okay, so I'm just gonna read. I kind of like this stuff on. It's a Bible Odyssey. Is what it is, and it's on Hagar. And it says, Hagar, the African mother of many nations who saw and named God, was enslaved, impregnated, abandoned, and liberated by Sarah and Abraham. So Hagar is perhaps more epithet than name. Hagar, resident alien. She is an African Egyptian. Woman or girl of childbearing age held in slavery by Sarah. Was the Hebrew-speaking audience who first heard her tell, and those of us who follow, supposed to believe that her Egyptian name just happened to sound like a Hebrew expression labeling her as other? Should we imagine that her enslaved didn't bother with the name she had been given and called her that epithet so much it became her name as far as they were concerned? However, much agency Hagar has, and it is substantial. Her story is an element of someone else's story. So no one bothers to ask, learn, remember, or record her true name. Her story appears in Genesis. So how can Hagar be a slave and Abraham's wife at the same time? Slavery is part of the culture fabric of the world that produced the scriptures. Though some debates whether servitude or even debt slavery should be used to describe the institution instead, the presumption of right to sexual access marks Hagar's status as enslaved. And at the same time, at Sarah's instigation, she becomes Abraham's wife, the same status Sarah has. There was a secondary wife category of lesser status, but Abraham and Sarah wanted Hagar's baby to be their full heir. So, she was given a pretty big title and place in the family. Sarah controls every aspect of Hagar's life, including the use of her body. The larger story is about God's fidelity to Sarah and Abraham and their failure to wait for the fulfillment of the divine promise. So there again, they didn't wait for what God had already promised them, and it causes problems. We've all seen that. When Sarah does not become pregnant, she decides to create a child through a surrogate whom she owns so that the child will be hers. After conceiving, Hagar looks down on Sarah, and Sarah decides to get rid of her and the unborn child. Abraham affirms Sarah's control over her slave, and Sarah inflicts some sort of abuse on her. The Hebrew verb is the same as the one used for Egyptian oppression of the Israelites. Dealt harshly with her. When Hagar runs away, even God affirms Sarah's ownership of Hagar. Hagar returns to her enslavement of God's command, but her life only gets more difficult. After Sarah has given birth to Isaac, she decides that Hagar and her son Ishmael need to go. Abraham leaves Hagar and their son in the wilderness with minimal provisions to meet their fate. Wow, that's pretty harsh. I don't like it very much. Hagar's status as slave rather than a wife dictates her fate. Maybe she should have had a contract signed, right? She whiz. Those who own her body use and discard it as they see fit. That's very sad. Is the Israelite God Hagar's God? Hagar has two extraordinary encounters with God. When she runs away, a divine messenger, God in disguise, appears to her. The messenger questions and she answers. The messenger commands and she obeys. Is she only responding to the power of a supernatural being? Or does she accept the sovereignty of Abraham's God? Because she's Egyptian, remember. So her response may offer a clue. Hagar receives the same sort of divine promise of offspring as Abraham and Sarah do. Hagar does not address God by that name. Instead, she gives God a new name, one of her choosing. She calls God El Roi, God who has seen me, or God whom I have seen. This naming of God by a person is without precedent, nor is there any following example of someone naming God in the scriptures. How does God see Hagar? The messenger states that God has given heed to Hagar's oppression. Those are the same words God says to the enslaved Israelites. So remember when Moses freed the Israelites, it's the same kind of, he's talking to Hagar the same kind of way. Throughout the Hebrew scriptures, this language is used for God in Israel, and also Hagar. Is Hagar's second divine encounter, God through the divine messenger hears the cries, literally voice of Hagar's son from heaven. That's interesting. I don't know if that means anything that he didn't hear Hagar crying because she was crying and felt desolate. But he did hear the son, and I don't know if that means anything. I will make you, okay, so this is God's regular response to the Israelites. Rachel, Israel, and David are all heard by God. God's promise to Hagar on behalf of her son, I will make you a great nation, is the same one given to Abraham, Moses, and Israel. As recipients of a dynasty promise, Hagar and Ishmael are in the company of Sarah and Abraham. Others will follow, but none outside of Israel. That's interesting, isn't it? So this is kind of a cool little thing on Hagar, the African mother of nations, because remember, she is Egyptian. She is an African Egyptian woman. So this is a did you know? This is a kind of a facts thing. Hagar is revered as a monarch by many African American Christians who find renaissance between her enslavement, sexual abuse, and ultimate liberation, including her thwarted first attempt because she ran away to begin with and then came back when she was still pregnant. And the experience of enslaved African women in the Americas and Caribbean. Though not mentioned in the Quran in Islam, Hagar is the mother of Abraham's promised heir. A portion of her wilderness fight is commemorated annually by pilgrims during the Hajj. Israelites practice two-tiered marriage. The children of often mentioned as a concubine, is a low status or secondary wife. We're not entitled to the inheritance. The angel of the Lord is often God in disguise. The divine messenger often speaks in the third person for God and the first person as God, sometimes switching back and forth. So that's interesting. Okay, so this is I just kind of wrote, so I got an article, it's 5 things I learned from Hagar's encounter with God. That's Ferrari Baya. But I started thinking, what are 5 things that I can relate to? Because I'm like, I need to start writing and doing my own research. So what are 5 things you or I, write down 5 things about Hagar that you can relate to as, well, you don't have to be a woman. I mean, what do you think she was going through during this time? Like, she didn't have a choice in it, right? So I just wrote down 5 things about Hagar that I can relate to. The first one was feeling alone and abandoned as a young woman. I had this huge amount. I didn't have a strong foundation at that time. So I had a huge amount of loneliness inside of me and a feeling of sort of, I don't know, abandonment. I don't know why. I had a wonderful family environment. I was never alone, but there was just some kind of piece missing inside of my soul. And so she had to have felt that way. She had to have felt alone. She was in this area by herself, right? Number 2 is she was in a position of weakness. And I felt that way also. But I also started thinking about it after I graduated high school, because of no strong foundation or no, and I felt these loneliness, and I didn't have any kind of anything, insecurities and all this stuff. I felt like I was in a position of weakness. Now I believe that I kept putting myself in that position. After I kind of got to a place where I grew stronger, and for me, that was self-development, professional development. I kept finding ways to make myself stronger, more independent, evolve and grow. And that, for me, a lot of that was education, leadership training for years, since a very long time ago. Number 3, I felt like she was proud and arrogant. I've been there. I've been there many times. I didn't realize how proud and arrogant I was until this point in my life, but I still am like that. I mean, honestly. And I think that's the competition with other women thing. I get along with men just great. Why do I want to always compete with women? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's part of our nature as women. Maybe not all women. I don't know. Maybe I'm just competitive. But I try to be, life has brought me to a place where I have been humbled many times, many times. Probably the most humbling piece, and that's why I don't know how Hagar managed to survive, or Sarah, sharing her husband, because when I was a young woman, my husband went out with other women when we were married. I don't think I understood it at the time. I didn't understand why or or any of that. I didn't even really believe it was happening. But for some reason, I was not the victim in that, although it was terribly hurtful. And you just don't trust, and their humility. I don't know. You're like here, and you're put down to a level down here. It's horrible. But I had to understand that I was doing it to myself. So when I met men back in that day, because of my weaknesses in believing in myself and standing up for myself, I would purposely, in a subconscious way, pick people that cheated on me or weren't emotionally involved in the relationship. It wasn't ever pre-planned and very logical why I chose them. So I put myself in that position many times, but it was also very humbling. And as I grew and developed, I've been in other humbling positions where my pride was kind of just taken, thank goodness. I hope that I'm doing better. Number 4, smart. I feel like she was a very intelligent, hard worker. And I relate to that. Like, she knew how to build her way up into the household to become the maidservant. Although maybe later on she wishes she wouldn't. I think she was hard enough and maybe even saw some power there, maybe she knew how to go about it and she made her way up. Reminds me of when I worked at a factory, and I wanted to get into middle management. I could understand what I needed to do to climb up a certain ladder to get where I wanted to go. A lot of it was by really hard work. You just really work really hard to get promoted. Then you get up to a certain level, and that's where the whole pride thing comes in, and that's when you usually get humbled. Number 5 is she was liberated by God. I too, as well, have been liberated by God because of my foundation, and my spirituality has grown and grown, and He has moved into my life. And because of my humility, which is good, I've allowed Him to, because before I wouldn't have let anybody in, So she was liberated by God, and she was also, her and her son were given a nation to rule. So that's how I kind of related to her. Jot down how you were, write it down in the comments. I don't see very many comments. I don't know why. The ones that are on there make no sense to me. And it's sort of, I think I clicked on it one time and went to some kind of porn thing. And I'm like, no for me. Okay. Oh boy, am I going through this today. We got about 10 minutes. And so I want to go through this other article, which I really thought was good. And then I have a couple other quotes as well. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that Abraham had more than one wife. Besides Hagar, he had one more. So Abraham had a principal wife who was Sarah, and 2 secondary wives. Hagar and Keturah was the other one. So Abraham's first wife was Sarah. She alone would possess the legal rights and social standing as Abraham's wife, and only her child Isaac would become the rightful heir to the family inheritance. You wonder if Isaac took care of the other kids, because I'm sure they had them. And it wasn't unusual to have a concubine at that time, because there wasn't as big a population as today. So God allowed it, but later on said only have one wife. So let's see. So a concubine was a woman, often a servant or slave, who lived with a man as if she were his wife, having sexual relations with him and bearing his children. So when one's wife was unable to produce an heir, taking concubine was a common solution in ancient times. But the concubine held secondary wife status, lower than the primary wife. So that's why Abraham let Sarah do what she wanted. Hagar gave Abraham a son whose name was Ishmael. He was not to be the son of God's covenant, though. Okay, so Keturah was Abraham's second wife after the death. So she was his second wife after the death of Sarah. Abraham had taken another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Joksan, Median, Ishbak, and Shura. So Sarah must have only bore one son, is all I see, Isaac. Like Hagar, Keturah was called both wife and concubine in Scripture. As a wife, Keturah was married to Abraham in the legal sense, living in a sexual union with him. Yet as concubine, she held a rank inferior to Sarah's. Keturah may have first become Abraham's concubine when Sarah was still alive. That's what I was just wondering. But was later elevated to the position of wife after Sarah passed away. Before Abraham died, he gave all his material possessions and the blessing of the covenant to Isaac, the child God had promised to him and Sarah. To the sons of Hagar and Keturah, Abraham gave only gifts from his house and then sent them away to live in the country east of Israel. Okay. I'm going to read a couple other quick quotes that I kind of liked. Or the one I really like a lot. God sees the exploited, the unloved, the mistreated, the sexually abused, the cast aside and abandoned. He communicates to Hagar and Leah here. Leah is another one in the Bible we're going to study later. I see you. You may be overlooked by everyone around you, but you are seen by the God of the universe. The other one is, this one I really like. This is Jonathan Kellerman. I saw this cartoon in the paper once. That Viking, Hagar the Horrible. He's standing on the mountaintop. This is a different Hagar. Hagar must have been a Viking, holding his hands to the heavens, shouting, "Why me?" And down from the heavens comes this answer. Why not? Maybe that's the ultimate truth. What right do I have to expect a smooth ride? I thought that was a good lesson for today. A good lesson. I've often heard, so Matthew Hussey is someone that I follow. Donna, my good friend Donna, recommended. He's all about dating and relationships, and he's not all about that. So the reason I really like him is he works with women, young, middle-aged, whatever age, more mature, to help them become secure within themselves, so that when they do start dating, that they're ready to pick the right person, that they're ready inside, that they really don't need someone, but they're ready inside. And he says that. The reason I was thinking of that is because he says that. He says a lot of people, I think he was interviewing someone, I don't know if he said it, but they were talking about how we don't, because, I'm always thinking, not always, not as much as I was, but how you don't have the right to think that you should meet someone, or, you aren't exactly special. Don't take it for an advantage, or don't, I forget how he said it exactly, but we don't have the ultimate right for a man or whoever to come up and just ask us out. You got to work for it, is what I think he's saying. If you want to really date, you have to put yourself out there. It's not just the men who have to ask you out. I think that's what he was trying to say, and that's what I kind of feel like, that we shouldn't expect someone just to come out and date us or whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but we shouldn't expect a smooth ride is what I'm trying to say. It's not smooth. It's really not, but I'll tell you what, you learn a lot about yourself. I love where I'm at. It's good to be alone. It's good for you to be alone and learn and grow about yourself. That's what happens. Okay, so this is 5 things that this Ferrari Baya talks about. Let's see, 5 things that she learned from Hagar's encounter with God. So in the Old Testament, it was common practice that when a wife was barren, she would give a slave to her son to bear her a child. Sarah and Hagar, Sarah was one of Abraham's slaves. When Sarah couldn't bear a child, she had Hagar conceive a child. Okay, so the first one that she talks about is the Lord is merciful. Number 2 is face fears courageously. Have faith in the promise is 3. 4 is intimacy with God brings comfort. 5 is God fulfills his promises. So those are good lessons, right? Number 1, the Lord is merciful. When Hagar conceived the child, she began to despise her mistress. As a result, Sarah mistreated her and Hagar had to flee from Sarah. Have you ever been in that situation? I think I have. Despite the contempt that Hagar showed towards Sarah, God did not look at Hagar's shortcomings to disqualify her from his blessings for her. God later showed mercy to Hagar through her son Ishmael by promising her that the son would never be a slave like her. This teaches us that God is merciful and compassionate. He looks beyond our failures, and it is only through his grace that we are saved. Face fears courageously. Ooh, I go through that sometimes. I'm telling you, sometimes, some days, yesterday, I was having all these things where your mind starts going, oh, I'm getting burnt out on my house remodel. And it wasn't working. Nothing was going right. It wasn't working right. And so I was having all these things come up. And I just said, you just have to face things and keep moving forward. In verse 9, Hagar encounters the Lord while she is on the move. In this moment, she's running away from her fears, her pain. See, I didn't look at that before. So she ran from her fears, her pain, her troubles, and she just wanted to be free. So she ran away from all of that. This is exactly how I would have reacted if I were in the same situation, and still how I react sometimes when I'm in a furnace. Like many of us, I want to come out of that situation immediately. However, the most profound thing happens to Hagar here. The angel commands her to return and submit. Hagar is to submit to Sarah, the woman who has mistreated her. Have you ever been in that situation? The person she is fleeing from. This blessed me deeply, as it is the resemblance of how we ought to deal with our challenges. Instead of running away from different situations, we can face these situations knowing the Lord will guide and protect us. When we face our problems, we receive blessings. It is through being present while in the furnace that we receive the greatest gifts that the Lord has in store for us at the end. Which reminds me of, I really wanted it. My job that I just resigned from, early retirement, I should say. I felt like that day after day after day after day, and I kept thinking, Lord, can you just free me from this? And then after my husband passed away too, that huge amount of grief that I was suffering was horrible. And I just wanted it to go away, and I wanted to fill it with other things. But it took time for me to work through it and for God to fill my life with other things. And so I'm glad now that he was in control, but boy, did I want to run from it. Have faith in the promise. When the angel commanded Hagar to return, she did not return defenseless. She was equipped with God's promise, a promise that would receive after returning and submitting. Verse 10 reads, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. One of the things I struggle with the most when I'm in a furnace is not seeing results. Often I wonder where I'm going, if I will win the battle, what winning really means. However, I have to constantly remind myself that no matter what challenge I may be facing, God already granted me victory. And difficulties I face while on this journey simply exist to mold my character. This is the same situation with Hagar. The angel of the Lord makes a promise to Hagar, and Hagar is to remain faithful until the Lord fulfills his promise. And this is years later. I'm feeling the same way with my business right now. Although I like it, although I like being on here every day, I'm not sure where it's all going to end up. And it's just, I have to keep doing it knowing it's where I need to be. So, however, so let's see. This is the same situation with Hagar. The angel of the Lord makes a promise to Hagar, and Hagar is to remain faithful until the Lord fulfills his promise years later. Hagar is not fully aware of how she will navigate her relationship with Sarah. Despite that, she focuses on the promise and she returns to Sarah. That's faith in action. I totally agree. That had to have been very hard. I feel like I've done that many times too. Some of the jobs I applied for at the university was, I don't know, for some reason I was humiliated because I didn't get them. And I had to just keep walking forward anyway, although many times people around me kept getting all these promotions and I wasn't going anywhere after all my work. It just wasn't my door. Intimacy with God brings comfort. My fourth lesson is from Hagar's intimate relationship with the Lord. The Lord is aware of Hagar's pain and misery, like he is ours. He knows every single hair in your head. Hagar finds comfort and encouragement from God, and she proceeds to acknowledge that. He is a God who sees her. Heavy burdens become bearable when we faithfully take our problems to God and listen to him. There are times when I have felt like a huge burden has been lifted off me right after kneeling down and praying. It's not that my circumstances change immediately while I'm praying, but when I just stop everything that I'm doing and take my problems to God, I always find comfort in him. No matter how big our problems may seem, we ought to have an intimate relationship with God, and we can trust him to intervene. It's like yesterday when I was feeling overwhelmed and fear creeps in and all those voices that are telling you it's not going to work and keep doing it anyway. And I don't have time to work on my website or any of that. Just keep going. Just keep doing what you're doing and it'll come around. And I knew that. I'm like, this is just an off day. Just hang tight. Tomorrow will be better. And it is. God fulfills his promises. Years later, after Hagar returns to Sarah, we learn that Hagar and Ishmael were sent away from Sarah's house due to another conflict. At this point, Hagar and Ishmael are in a desert, stranded. Hagar has lost hope. The same Ishmael who God had said was to be king of many nations was stripped to nothing. Can you imagine that? Yeah, I can, sort of. And yes, the Lord did it again. He intervened. The angel of God came and saved the boy. He fulfilled his promise to Hagar. He later fulfills his promise to send Lord Jesus Christ, a Savior, who took away the sin of the world. God fulfills his promises to us indeed. That was good. That was a good one. Sorry, I know I'm blowing. Ooh-wee, I got 2 minutes. Okay, everyone have a blessed day. I love you. Thanks for coming on. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell. And I'll be here Monday through Friday, 1 o'clock. I'm trying to post it every day. So thanks for tuning in. Please leave comments. If they make sense, I'll answer them. Have a blessed day. Love you. Bye.